Good evening. This week is a very special week because I am recording this shiur now Tuesday night. Tomorrow night becomes Chamisha Osir B'Shvat, which you've heard from me 5 times in the last 8 weeks. It ushers in the Chesed and the Rachamim, and it's an unbelievable, auspicious time for Klal Yisrael, and we should avail ourselves to the special uniqueness which the Zman, the time, is drenched with, and the ability for us to ask for what we need and for what we want, and to be able to make this special Kiddush Hashem in every which way is very unique. Now this Shabbos is Parshas Yisro, and one of Yisro's names, as Rashi points out, is Yisro because Yisro means extra, additional, and that's why one of his names was Yeser. And Rashi says, Yeser, because Yeser, that he added on a parsha. In other words, we have a whole sedra named after him. And the famous question is asked that if there was an extra parsha designated and named after Yisro, so why don't we have an extra parsha for the Benos Tzolafchad, who brought a question before Moshe Rabbeinu, and Moshe Rabbeinu asked HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and he said yes. Their taina of what the Yerusha, the inheritance, should be when there are no sons and they had no brothers, to get what was duly and properly given and belonged to their father, Tzolafchad. And we also have, we had last week, the parsha of Pesach Sheni, that if someone was not eligible and able to bring the Korban Pesach, we gave them a second chance. So why wasn't there some sort of alluding to this in a separate parsha? I mean, these were also highlighted in the Torah as unique events which enlightened and allowed Klal Yisrael to have the totality of the shleimus of what these things do, the Yerusha and Pesach Sheni. Yet we don't find any special. We mention what happened, and we tell like the story in the Torah, but we didn't add an extra and complete parsha. So the answer that some of the Meforshim say is because the Torah would have been complete without Yisro's suggestion and Yisro's desire to bring to the world some usefulness. You see, he said that Moshe Rabbeinu, my dear son-in-law, you are sitting from morning to night answering questions, answering shilas. You're going to wither away. You can't keep up at this pace. Why don't you appoint alafim, chamishim, asaros, for the big shilas, the bigger Talmidei Chachamim, and for the others at their distinct level of what the type of shilah and what it required in terms of the answer and who should be appointed. But if he wouldn't have gotten up and Moshe Rabbeinu would have continued, there's no chiddush in halacha of what he did. He was giving an eitzah. He was giving a good idea how to survive and be of service to the people. So that is the reason that there was a separate parsha added for him, because there was a uniqueness, as we're going to discuss in a moment, by his input and it being incorporated to Moshe Rabbeinu's scheduling, that made a tremendous difference. But the others were not. They were in the essence of Klal Yisrael. In other words, these were halachos about Pesach Sheni and about the inheritance with Benos Tzelovchad, that in the essence of Klal Yisrael and the Torah it existed. It just had to be brought out to light. So there was nothing new that was brought about. In the Torah, it looks brand new because they came, they put forth the Shaila. But in essence, it had to come out because it was part of Torah. And that's why there is not a specific separate Sedra for those two things. But I'm going to bring out in just a moment what was the uniqueness if Klal Yisrael could have lived on without Yisro's suggestion. Now the Al-Shach HaKadosh asks a question that our very first pasuk says, Vayishma Yisro, Yisro heard. And Rashi says, Mashmu Shama Uba. What was this striking event that he came running? And when it's mentioned Yisro's name, it says Kohen Midyan. Now, we know that Yisro was a priest in each and every religion that was around at that time. And he practiced it for a while. And when he came to the conclusion that it was not some sort of illuminating, truthful essence, he left the religion and he became priest in the next religion afterwards. And that's why the nations were very angry at him and put him in Chayrim. If you remember in Shemos, a few Sedras back, that his daughters had to go out to shepherd the sheep because the father, which would have been the normal thing, couldn't go out to do it. He was in excommunication. He was put into Chayrim because they were angry at him that he dropped the religion and ran to the next. So they put him in Chayrim. So he couldn't walk out of the house. But asks the Al-Shach HaKadosh, why does the Torah say Kohen Midyan? I mean, if somebody came into your house and he was, let's say, a Baal Tshuva, he was Jewish, but he was never Shomer Shabbos, and then he did Tshuva. So he comes into your house, and you have a guest there in the house, and you introduce him and say, this is so-and-so, who was 20 years ago the famous Machal Shabbos. We would never say something like that to humiliate and embarrass someone at that level. So why do we mention Kohen Midyan? That he was an Oived Avodah Zorah half of his life. Why do we even mention it? So the Al-Shach says, we mention it because it was not a put down to humiliate him. It was tremendous praise that Yisro elevated himself up through and through to a level that not only was the father-in-law of Moshe, but he had a parsha added in his honor for his suggestions and his positivity. And when he heard about Kriyas Yamsuf, and he heard about Milchemes Amalek, he came running. Now, so the Alshach basically says that it was praise, that he came from such an extreme negative background, and then he came running to Yiddishkeit. Now, he asks also, why is it that the whole world, Shamu Amim Yergazun, the whole world heard what was happening for Klal Yisrael? Why didn't anyone else come running? Why was he the only one who came running? And the Mefarshim answer, because he was the only one with the word Vayishma, the first word of our Sedra. Meaning that we talk and we listen a whole day, day and night. But it's not really meaningful. But when Yisro heard, like the whole world heard, but in his case it became tremendous shmiya, the power of hearing, that not only did he hear about it as part of gossip or discussion, but he heard what was happening for the Jewish people, for Klal Yisrael, and it entered into the fullest strength of message to him and became part and parcel of every inch of his essence. And that's why he was the only one to come, because it didn't strike and enter and remain. That means we can be talking to somebody and the person asks you, how are you? And you begin to answer, well, I just came from a doctor, my foot. But the other person is not even listening to one word. Why did he say, how are you? If he didn't want to hear the answer, or didn't have even the smallest iota of interest, why did he ask? But once he asked, have the courtesy for the 30 seconds or the 50 seconds to listen to the person, that there should be listening with quality, that it should enter to the innermost sanctum. For the individual. And says the Alshach, that's the Vayishma. It's giving us praise. The Vayishma is a praise. The Kohen Midyan was praise. That it was all showing the transformation of a man like Yisro and how he became the backbone and one of the cementing factors of Klal Yisrael in its list of personalities. Now, the Ksav Sofer says that at the end of our Sedra, there's a story of Amalek, and that was one of the two things that impressed Yisro so much. Now, says the Ksav Sofer that 2 weeks after Matan Torah, Klal Yisrael was in a city, a place called Refidim. Refidim, that was the name of the place. And Rashi says, why was it called Refidim? Sharafu Yedeim Midivrei Torah. That they came out elevated, inspired, uplifted And 2 weeks later, they already were not acting from. Sharafu Yudeim Midivrei Torah. They weren't learning the Torah. They weren't behaving like they were supposed to. And this shocked Yisro. And he wanted to understand how in the world could it be that Klal Yisrael they were in Mitzrayim. They saw such miracles which were astounding. And 2 weeks, and then they went out and they lived a life with Mon and with the bearer Miriam. The water was traveling around with them in the ground, with them in the earth. And as Klal Yisrael moved and traveled, so did the Be'er, the well. So they lived through this. They came to the Yam Suf. They saw the millions and billions of the gold and the diamonds and the rubies coming out of the walls of water. So how in the world did they suddenly lessen and become lazy in their Torah observance? So he answers and says that you learn from this story after you saw Kriyas Yam Suf, and 2 weeks later they were not behaving in Refidim as they should have, and then they even asked, Hayesh Hashem b'kirbeinu imlo. They came to a point that for the slightest reason, they said, is Hashem really in our midst? That their power of emunah, the backbone of the essence of Klal Yisrael, is emunah and bitachon. And if there was nothing there, at the level that it was supposed to be, it started causing their decrease and their weakness. And that's why it says, Meforshim bring, that he heard Milchemes Amalek. It shouldn't have said Milchemes Amalek, it should have said the Nitzachon, over the winning, the victory over Amalek. Why in the world would it say Milchemes Amalek? It was their victory and how they beat them to a pulp. But the answer is that the Ksav Sofer says, is because if you let an opportunity go, then you can start sliding down the ladder like there's no tomorrow. That if Klal Yisrael would have kept up what they had to do and how they had to behave with the level of saturated emunah, then this never would have come about. And how could they fall like that? So the answer was because they let a span of time, they didn't immediately learn Torah and do mitzvahs as immediate as they had to. And you know, there was a story with Reb Chaim Volozhiner with a Talmud that he had that was sitting, a Rav of the city in Volozhin came into Reb Chaim Volozhiner's yeshiva, and by breakfast or lunch, there were 8 Talmidim sitting at a table. And the Rav walked up to the table, and he said, I have a shaila I'd like to ask you, and I'd like to know if anyone can offer an answer. So he posed the question, And 2 of the 8 boys knew the answer, and 6 did not know the answer. So when the Rav left, after hearing from the 2 who knew an answer, left, one of the 6 said that he is so disappointed that he didn't know the answer, that for the next 7 years he is going to stay in the Bais Yaakov. Understandably, he had to sleep a few hours, he had to go to the washroom, he had to shower. But besides that, and davening and taking a bite, he had nothing with the world to do. He stayed in the Bais Yaakov for the 7 years and learned. Now, when he was finished with the 7 years, he went to Reb Chaim Volozhiner and he asked him the following question. When I was so stunned that I didn't know the answer for that Rav, and I made a resolution, and my resolve was, I'm going to stay in the Bais Yaakov 18 hours a day for 7 years, and I did it. I didn't go to any family weddings. I didn't go anywhere. I stayed in the Bais Yaakov. I thought back and realized that I had washed at that breakfast or lunch, and I never benched. Should I have benched and then gone for the 7 years when I remembered that I didn't bench? So Reb Chaim Volozhiner said, of course, you should have benched. Benching is a diaraisa, and you had to bench. That's the halacha. But had you benched, you wouldn't have gone for the 7 years. Which basically he was telling him, because there would have been a space of time that you would have been convinced by the Yetzer Hara 10 reasons why not to go for the 7 years into the Bais Yaakov. But because you didn't wait even a minute, you went and you spent the 7 years in the Bais Yaakov. And the Chavetz Chaim once had a story that his executive director, or whoever helped him in the yeshiva with the money, with the gashmias, he came into the Chavetz Chaim and he said, Rebbe, I just opened an envelope that came in the mail with 500 ruble. Now, the Chavetz Chaim lived 100 years ago. And, I mean, he was born like 100 and maybe 180, 190 years ago. But he was nifter in 1933, and he said, oh, who was the person? So the administrator said there was no name on the envelope. There was no return address. And it's a miracle that we got the money. It should have normally would have been stolen. So the Chavetz Chaim said, you know, I'm very interested in meeting the man who sent it. And the hamlet was like 8 miles away, the little village. But the administrator, the Chavetz Chaim, wants to see him. He'll try his best to find, ask here, ask there. He went to the town, and after a few days, he found the person. So he said, a yashar koyach. but we're very curious. Why didn't you write a return address with your name and seal it and postmark it, something? So he answered and said, I'll tell you what happened. I was in the middle of doing a business deal. And I said that if I succeed in this business deal, I am going to give 500 ruble to the Radner Yeshiva. And the deal worked out, Baruch Hashem. And I took out an envelope, and a thought came to my mind, like, okay, you can do this later. Meantime, you had this you had to do, and that you had to do. So the man said that once those type of thoughts came into my mind, I grabbed an envelope, I put the money in and addressed it to the Radner Yeshiva, but nothing else, because I felt that as the minutes would go by till I sent out the money, I would end up sending 5 ruble. And that the Yetzer Hara would be saying to me, 500 ruble, you can give 50 ruble and they'll be dancing. And once those type of thoughts came into my mind, I didn't want the Yetzer Hara to succeed, that I wouldn't end up sending 500 ruble. So I just grabbed the envelope and put it in, and I just addressed it, but I didn't even put my return address on the envelope for fear of what will happen in the next few minutes, then the next few hours, and that my schus, for the schus HaTorah of the Radner Yeshiva, will be totally reduced to almost nothing. So we have to seize the moment. And that's why it says that Yisro came running, because he understood that he had a question he wanted to answer, and he was going to be Megayer because he was so enthusiastic and so positive about what was happening with Klal Yisrael. And he internalized it to such a level. But he knew that if he delayed at all, that would be it. It would never, ever happen. Now, you know that we have Rav Soloveitchik, Zichrono Livracha. We have the Aseres Hadibros in this week's Parsha. And the Medrash says that first Hashem said all 10 dibros in one dibur. 1 second. And the Klal Yisrael didn't know what he was talking about. Whatever they were able to hear, they didn't understand. So HaKadosh Baruch Hu said, you know what? I'm going to say each dibur one by one. So why didn't HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the Mefarshim asked, just do it that way to begin with? Why did he do an all-encompassing one dibur, including all 10 items? So the answer that some say is that HaKadosh Baruch Hu was able to implant into the essence of every Yiddish neshama liolam voed the root of Torah and the Kedusha of Torah. So it was somewhere inside, in the innermost sanctum, in the essence of Klal Yisrael. Then he came down like one madrega. Once it was cemented into Klal Yisrael, that each and every one by one, in the power of Torah. Now, one, for instance, and that's why when I said to you in the beginning of the shir, that why that the extra parsha was added for Yisro and not for the story of Benos Tzalofchad, an extra parsha, or the story of the Pesach Sheni. And I said to you, because the Torah would have been the same with or without what happened with Yisro. So when he actually brought up the topic, it was to be able to enter into the essence of Klal Yisrael, and that it be so prevalent, the inyan, that each and every year, because you see, if Moshe Rabbeinu would have stayed, he would have been the one up here, and he would have been answering the better, the easier, the longer shot, everything. But to enter into the essence of each and every yid, that's what the advice of Yisro accomplished. And that's why we added the Sedra to him. So likewise, over here, that when HaKadosh Baruch Hu said everything in one dibur and no one understood, so what did he do it for? There was nothing accomplished. Oh, was there accomplished? Because when you write 5 books on Lahavdil geometry, the Chochma Bagoyim, yes, there is. And there's some that, but that geometry doesn't enter into the essence and the mahus of every student being taught that geometry, taught the wisdom of it, the Chochma. And yes, Chochma Bagoyim Tamin. But when Hashem said it all, the mechanism worked, that it clicked, whether they understood it or they didn't understand it. He paved the way that it could become part and parcel of every yid in their machshava and their dibur and their maisa. Now, so it was great purpose. Now, one of the dibris that was said was Lo sisa es shem Elokecha Lashav. Now, it doesn't mean a bracha levatola, that if someone just says a bracha and doesn't drink the water, that's a bracha levatola. But the Gemara gives an example of what is meant by Lo sisa Shem Hashem Elokecha Lashav. And the Gemara says that he uses Hashem's name and says that the tree is a tree. We don't need him to say that the tree is a tree. We know it is. In other words, it's Lashav. It's for nothing. You're not gaining something because you're saying Hashem's name here. The information is, everyone knows that a tree is a tree. But that, the Gemara says, is what it's referring to. Now, the question is, if you had to list Aseres HaDibris, you put in Shama as Shabbos Lakadsho, Shabbos, Kibbut Aveim, Lo Tirtzach, Lo Tigna, basic important components for a world to survive. If people got angry at someone and all they walked over and killed them, that for every second thing they could go killing people, what kind of a world would this be? But you wouldn't put in Lo sisa es Hashem Elokecha Lashav, Because that's not the level in anyone's mind of Shmir Shabbos, of Kibbutz Av, of all of these things. But the Torah say the Meforshim, HaKadosh Baruch Hu included it because he wanted you to value each and every word of speech. And for a person to realize that you just think that Lo Sisa is another command, but Shabbos is Shabbos, you don't know how important Dibur is. And I want to share with you a short story. The Baal Shem Tov had a student whose name was Reb Nachman Horedenka. Now this young student, young, in other words, he was 20 years old, traveled to Constantinople, which is Istanbul in Turkey. That was the name for many hundreds of years, Constantinople in Turkey. And this Talmud was not married, and he came to live with the Jews there, whatever his reasons were. And the people found out that he is not married. So they, it's a Talmud of the Baal Shem, and he's not married, let's talk him. And they started talking shidduchim, this one, that one, and a shidduch was made, and the day of the marriage came. And they had the chuppah, and after the chuppah, they went in the chosan kala to yichud, and the chosan disappeared. First, they thought maybe he was in the washroom. Then it was longer and longer. They thought maybe he was kidnapped. Bekitzer, bottom line, the entire wedding celebration was thrown into chaos and despair. May simcha liyagon. The chosan is not here. What are we going to dance about? And everybody went home. And the girl was an aguna because there was already a kinyan, there was chuppah. 5 months later, they hear that this Talmud, Reb Nachman Horedenka, is back in Mezhebush with the Baal Shem, his Rebbe. So the father and daughter said, let's go travel to Mezhebush. Now, understandably, it did not mean that they went to the airport and 10 hours later or 6 hours later they were by the Baal Shem. They had to take a boat, and then they had to hire a wagon and a driver and horses. They had to be taken from there back to Mezhebush. And when they got to Mezhebush, they went into the Baal Shem Tov and they said, Rebbe, your Talmud hat uns glücklich gemacht. Your Talmud turned our lives from happiness into sadness, depression, disappointment. So the Baal Shem Tov said, I'm going to call in Reb Nachman Horedenka and ask him why he did this. So he called him in, and Reb Nachman said, under the chuppah I saw that my kala, the person I was marrying, was going to be expecting almost like the first month or two of marriage, and that she would give birth to a baby boy, and he would be and she would die by childbirth. And I couldn't tell them what I saw, You're not supposed to talk about Ruach HaKodesh. But I didn't want to be the cause of a young girl, 18 years old, to die. So I just disappeared. So the Baal Shem Tov said to him, listen, don't play the role of Shamayim. Destiny is something that you're not supposed to even be thinking about. They're giving you a gift from heaven that you can see what's going to end up happening in many cases. But that doesn't mean that you should take the destiny into your own hands. And what I want you to do is tell her what you saw. And if she decides that she wants to continue the marriage, even if it's only for the year, do it. So the Chassan, Reb Nachman Haradenka, went to her and told her the truth. So she said, obviously, you're a tremendous tzaddik, and for me, it's worth to be a year together with such a tzaddik, even if at the end of the year I'll die. So they continued the marriage, and in the 9th month, the girl, the wife, started davening to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Rabbanu Shalom, just let me live until the bris. In other words, I accepted that by childbirth I will die. But give me the extra 8 days that I should be by the bris to see the bris. So she gave birth, she did not die. And they came to the bris and they named the baby Simcha. And she died. And Reb Nachman Haradenka cried because he said that once she accepted to be married to me, even if it was only for a year, they tore up the Gezerah in Shemayim because she was willing to be with that tzaddik, even if it would cost her life after the year. But because she was the whole 9th month davening, Rabbanu Shalom, just let me live to the bris. Rabbanu Shalom, just let me live to the bris. That's what happened in Shemayim. They listened to her davening and she died by the bris. So this story shows us how careful a person has to be with what they ask for, what they say, that every word could make a life and death difference. By the way, after she died, Odel, the daughter of the Baal Shem Tov, went up to this Reb Nachman Haradenka and said, well, what are you going to do now with an 8-day-old baby? Let me have the baby, and you come every day to visit him, to hold him, to feed, whatever you want. But you can't bathe and diaper and feed and take care of a newborn baby. So it turns out that this newborn baby, Simcha, grew up in her house. And Reb Nachman Haradenka very often came, of course, to visit his son. And after a while, this boy, Simcha, grew up, and he ended up marrying Odel's daughter, Fega. And Fega had 2 brothers, the Degel Machne Ephraim, world-famous Degel Machne Ephraim, and Reb Baruch Mimezhebush. These were her 2 brothers. And her daughter, Fega, married this Simcha, and they had a baby, and they named him Nachman, because Reb Nachman Haradenka, the father, had by then passed away. And the Nachman that they named him became and grew up to be Reb Nachman of Breslov. when you hear about Reb Nachman Breslover, this was the baby that they had, this Simcha with Fega, the daughter of, and when everyone goes to Reb Nachman Breslover and they say Reb Nachman ben Fega, that's who we're talking about. But the story I told you, which I usually don't go into so much story, but is to illuminate the concept of why the status of Lo Sisa Eshem Hashem Elokecha Lashav was part of the Aseres Hadibros. Because indeed it had that status because to teach us the value and the import of every word that we say, for good and the opposite. Now, the Arizal says that Yisro was the neshama of Cain. You remember our friend Cain at the beginning of Bereshis? He got up and he killed Hevel. And there's a split by Mekubolim. The Zohar Kodesh even says that the neshama of Hevel went into Moshe Rabbeinu. Many Kabbalists bring that he was the neshama of Noach, if you remember I told you. And that's why his life began with the teva, with the little casket that he was floating in the water with by the story of Noach. But over here, the Arizal says that, and he quotes the Zohar HaKadosh, that Hevel was Moshe and Yisro was Cain. And that's the reason why when Yisro came to see the family and become a Yid, that this whole issue of a Bezdin and judging, answering shilas came up. Because Cain, as soon as he saw that his korban was not accepted, it says, in Medrash it's brought, he screamed out, less din v'less dayan. There's no judge in this world, and there's no judgment in this world. Chas v'shalom, meaning there's no HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And he had to come back to be misaken what he screamed out then, and to agree to originate and create through his suggestions, Botei Din, Yesh Din, V'Yesh Dayan. Now, if you take a look what Yisro said to his son-in-law, it was 10 or 11 psukim. It was a long thing. And in the middle, there's words, Va'ata techazeh. And that's how the Zohar Kodesh and plenty of places refer to this parsha of Yisro giving advice. So they all asked the Meforshim, if that parsha is so important, those 11 psukim, why doesn't it refer to it not as the parsha of Va'ata techazeh, because Va'ata techazeh is smack in the middle of all 11 psukim. Why doesn't it refer to this inyan by the first pasuk of when he began to speak? And the Meforshim answer and say, because it's very easy for a person to criticize, but to come up with a suggestion and a positive recommendation of what to do, they don't do, they're just busy criticizing. But Yisro, he did criticize, but then he started with the pasuk Va'ata techazeh, that you should see to a point he came up with a creative solution after the criticism. And that's why we refer to the whole parsha of his discussion of Va'ata Techazeh. Because when we want to criticize, we have to be careful in criticism. But if we do, we better have some positivity of what to do and how to do about what you are criticizing. And the Zohar Kodesh goes so far to say on the words Va'ata Techazeh, you see on a person's hand, we have the lines. If you look at the palm of your hand, you will see lines. That's called sirtutin. And tzaddikim used to be able to take a look at the hand and to be able to see what's going to happen with the person whose hand they're looking at in 5 years, in 20 years. To us, it just looks like lines. But there was a tremendous power, and that's why the Gemara many times, there's a discussion about a shaila, and the Gemara says, Lo have biyodei, it wasn't in his hand. Now, what do you mean it wasn't in his hand? You're discussing a shaila. Just say if you didn't have a conclusion, they didn't have an answer, they didn't. What biyodei? What does the hand have to do with the shaila being asked in the Gemara? But with the Zohar Kodesh, you understand, because everything, the person from their birth until their patira is on the hand. And if they had a discussion of a halacha, they should have been able to find it on their hand, the answer, because it's all there. The millions and millions of things are on the hand. But they weren't able to be masiged. That's why they said, Lo hava biyodei. It's not on, they didn't find it on the hand to be able to explain the shaila at hand. And that's why we refer in all the meforshim and the kadmonim to the parsha of Va'ata Techazeh, because the absolute positivity is the thing to go with and to be with. Now, the famous Chazal that they were Vayichan Sham Yisrael, and we say, Ke'ish echad b'leiv echad. Now, and we learned that they were united. Ke'ish echad b'leiv echad, they all became one. And then they could be makabel the Torah. Because when there's achdus by Klal Yisrael, there's unity, there's no machloikis, and that's why there's so much machloikis, because the Yetzer Hara, the Samach Mem, knows if he can just stir up trouble in the shul, between a husband and wife, between a Rav and his shul, a teacher in a classroom, to have disunity, that's all they need. Their job was done. Then there's a calamity in achieving any goal, because without achdus, it cannot happen. And the Sanzarov once said that we say Monday and Thursday after we learn Yehi Ratzon Shanishma V'Nizbaser B'Sur. We say 4 Yehi Ratzons, and the 5th one is Achenu B'nei Yisrael. So the Sanzarov, Reb Chaim Sanzar, asked, why by the 5th? Don't we say Yehi Ratzon? Like we say for the other 4, that may it be your divine will, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, for this and that. So the Sanzarov says, because the last one, the words are Achenu B'nei Yisrael, Hanasunim Batsaru Vashivya, ha'omdim bein bayom uvein bayabosha, ha'mokum yerachem aleihem v'yotziem mitzara l'rvocha me'afela liora u'mishibud l'gula. So it's a unification of Gans Klal Yisrael, said the sons of Rav, that when Klal Yisrael is so united, you don't have to ask HaKadosh Baruch Hu Yehi Ratzon. And that's why it's not said. We start with the words, Achenu B'nai Yisrael. Because when it's truly through and through Achenu B'nai Yisrael, then we are on our way to the Geula Shalema. And in every community and in every household and in every yeshiva, everywhere, Klal Yisrael should work to look aside from the disparaging comments and the difficulties bein Adam lachaveru and try to promote unity of the Ish Echad, Belev Echad.